Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Irish NFL show with me, Colum Cronin. And I'm delighted to be joined by a good friend of mine, a good friend of the show, the student of the game, Kyle Nash. Kyle, how are you doing, sir?
Hey, great to jump in to do more stuff at the Irish NFL show. Another Super Bowl is coming up, and I'm glad I'm talking to you before that happens. Have you still come down for meeting Patrick Surtain? I'm asking.
No, and now that he is proving week in, week out that he is the best cornerback in the league, and people nationally are starting to say you got Sertanned. I think that is quite telling.
So Surtain is quite certain in coverage. By the way, and I'll ask this, I don't mean to hijack your show, but how about Sean Payton proving Nathaniel Hackett may not have been so adept after all here potentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me the issue with Sean's comments were more that he backed off of them. I mean, I think if you're going to make it, stand over it. To me, it's a bit like when somebody says "no offense, but" no, you don't get to say that. Either you say the statement and you stand over it, or you don't make it. And I just felt Sean should have either stood over it, or never made it. Obviously, the first few weeks of the season looked pretty bleak to say the least. I mean, the Madden 70 points. I mean, that will live long in the memory. I'd never seen that, obviously, outside of an actual computer game. So it was kind of weird glitch in the matrix. I still don't know what to make of it, Kyle. I'll be honest, because how like it's great and it's been fun and exciting, and I can tell you when you're watching primetime games on this side of the Atlantic and it's 4:36 a.m. It's nice that they're winning, but how sustainable is that turnover? He has got Russ to play within himself, which is something that Pete Carroll couldn't do. All it took was Russ to be humbled time and time and time again last year, nationally on television, to become the butt of everybody's jokes. So that's all it took for us to be humbled. But I am certainly enjoying it. I think for the Broncos, they got a big couple of weeks here coming up against the Browns and the Texans. I think if they can even win one of those, it will set them up,
Yeah.
because the back end of the season, you play the Chargers twice. I don't think the Broncos have struggled against the Chiefs and the Raiders, but they've never had issues against the Chargers. You got the Patriots thrown there. You got to go on the road to Detroit. That's an issue. But those will be, I think, two tough games because the Browns aren't going to give you anything, and you got to go on the road to Houston. Not easy.
How about stealing one from the Chiefs for the first time in forever? I,
Forever. As they say, nobody beats the Denver Broncos 17 times in a row. Uh, so, so with that said, I mean, we can go in many different ways. Let's open the floor, because I know at this time of year, we're recording this on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Um, you're getting drawn in every which direction. So obviously, being based in Florida, you talk Jags a lot, but I'm going to open the floor up to you, because maybe maybe you don't want to open with Florida football as such. What where Here we are sitting at back end of November. What has kind of caught your eye or intrigued you about the NFL this season, Kyle? That could be good, that can be bad, that could be a player, a coach, a franchise, it could be ownership, whatever it happens to be. What's catching your eye?
Man, listen, I'll tell you what. I know everybody's talking about CJ Stroud as a sheer rookie of the year candidate. Obviously, he was the student of the game mid-season rookie of the year. Bing! And everybody's talking about, oh, CJ Stroud MVP. Not enough people are talking about DeMeco Ryans as a coach of the year candidate, Colum. That in itself is nothing short of a small crime. First of all, I was told that defensive based coaches are supposed to fail. I won't have the comment about how the Jets are still somehow competing without Aaron Charlie Rodgers. 4 snaps. Who had that on the bingo card? Good gravy. Anyways, but with all that in mind, that's one 49er head coach that's having relative success being a defensive coach. And here comes DeMeco Ryans, a guy who had bad blood with the organization at one point, had some sort of a lawsuit with them, which, of course, they've since settled and all that got buried, hatchet buried, if you will. And now they get CJ Stroud, Will Anderson Jr., who's, by the way, a fine defensive rookie of the year candidate. He wasn't my midseason rookie of the year for the student of the game. Or maybe he was. I'd have to check the tape. There were two that were very close. But here's what I'll say, Colum. You have all that going on, and that's great fun. But what about all the injuries taking place? I was told that a rookie quarterback without adequate protection is a problem. I don't know what weirdo said that, me, but apparently it doesn't apply to CJ Stroud. I know he just had a 3-interception game this past week against the Cardinals. Stuff happens. They still won the football game. That tells me plenty. Now, I don't know if it tells me more about the Cardinals than the Texans, but that was obviously a trap game because the Jags traveling to Houston is already a playoff game. I spoke with the Jacksonville Jaguars' Josh Allen after the game in the locker room in Everbank Stadium, and when asked if he thought that game was essentially a playoff game, they were already taking the Titans game leading into it as a playoff game because the AFC South Championship is suddenly going to be a true race. Listen, I got flack for saying in late August that the Texans would have 7 wins and match the Titans with a 7-win total. Now, apparently, I'm a Houston Texan pessimist with my prediction. Funny how that all worked, and a lot of why that happened was, of course, CJ Stroud, but under the leadership of DeMeco Ryans, this and more was made possible. By the way, I was told that Devin Singletary was a bad running back in Buffalo. Well, I guess we have something else to check under the DeMeco Ryans regime. So I think that's a huge, huge thing in and of itself right there. By the way, Colum, I see a high likelihood that we see a backup quarterback of some sort coming out of the AFC North. I don't wish injury on anybody, but Lamar Demetrius Jackson's history tells us that's the case. And already Joey Burr has gotten hurt. Looks like it's going to knock the Bengals out of the playoffs. And I don't know who's playing for the Browns this week, but I know it's not Deshaun Watson. Here's another story for you. The Browns defense, they're great at football. No. American football. I got to make sure I'm clear with that on these airwaves here. Anyways. But listen, those are the two things that just hurl themselves off the tablet for me and just are completely fun things to watch. By the way, you want an actual MVP candidate here, Colum? Tyreek Hill needs to be getting a lot more love. Okay? I get that the Dolphins only averaged 20.5 points in the past 2 games, yet and somehow competing with the Chiefs, who are suddenly a defensive team. I didn't get that memo. Well, I did because I covered it in Everbank Stadium where what was it? 11 points that the Chiefs scored? I didn't think Patrick Mahomes II was capable of scoring that low a point total. Crazy stuff going on there with that. And of course, the big story for the week being not only Joey Burr and Mark Andrews of the Ravens getting regular season injuries, but how about that Monday night game call? There was some competition for you. A little something that might help the Broncos if you're not going to compete in the AFC West, but still, that was a fun game to watch at the end. And let's put it this way. There are now more drops this season for the Kansas City Chiefs than the heaviest of Irish rains. See what I did there with the drops? Yeah, you like that?
I think a number of things jump out. Like, let's jump on the last point there in terms of the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. You and I were there in the Super Bowl last year when we saw Mahomes with an exceptional second half performance. He went off the field. He was limping. He comes back. He absolutely lights it up on the first drive. The entire atmosphere in the stadium changes and everyone kind of goes, oh, this is the Chiefs because we've seen this story before. This year, you've talked about the drops, but the Chiefs have been outscored by the Browns. The Browns, who, as you point out, have lost to Deshaun Watson. They've had PJ Walker. They've had DTR, who started. They've signed Joe Flacco to the practice squad. They've been all over the place, but they have managed to score more points than the Chiefs. And everyone's talking about the Browns defense, not the Browns offense. How concerned or are you at all concerned? Do you just think this is a blip? Do the Chiefs get it fixed? Where do you sit on this, Kyle?
When it comes to tournament football, you just need a guy that can keep things cooling at the helm. And maybe my bias is thus that I grew up watching Joe Montana, infamously known as Joe Cool, Hey, there's John Candy. That reference to him take him down the field in the Super Bowl to beat the Bengals, such as that was, right? But in tournament football, if you have that ice cold vein quarterback, doesn't even necessarily have to be a great player, just a guy that can take the helm and keep you in it. That's Patrick LaVon Mahomes II, who also, by the way, happens to be the best quarterback in the league right now and is making a case to surpass Brady as the GOAT already, which, hey, listen, he can actually run the football too. Let's see some tape of Brady doing that. I can tell you it does not look as graceful, even with Patrick LaVon Mahomes II having an ankle injury in the Super Bowl. But so long. Listen, with the Chiefs in particular, so long as Mahomes is on the roster, they're still a real threat. And not for nothing, Travis Michael Kelce had a rare bad game. These things happen. There have been drops issues other places, but listen, Valdez-Scantling, I feel like he'll get it right in the main stage. Things are different in the playoffs, and it transforms players to do things that they may not normally be capable of doing. We saw Jalen Hurts, by the way, have a great performance, an MVP caliber one, were he not across from Patrick LaVon Mahomes II, who eventually won the game, right? So the Chiefs are always scary. I mean, just ask coaches, just ask defensive coordinators. Hey guys, would you rather have them in the playoffs or not? You'll get a resounding no. I have no doubt. So yeah, they're still incredibly dangerous. They're not going to be kept out of the playoffs, so they're always going to be a factor. Will they be going through Arrowhead? Maybe, maybe not. But I think even on the road, the Chiefs are dangerous enough.
You mentioned, Jalen Hurts there and the fact that he had, such a great game in the Super Bowl. And I want to get your perspective because I was the conductor of the Jalen Hurts hype train since he entered the league. I just think as a player and as a person, he's fantastic. He's one of those rare breeds who's obsessed with getting better, and he just doesn't stop. And you're not worried about putting a clause in his contract about him how much he needs to study. He's of the Peyton Manning. It might be time to stop watching tape and get some sleep, Jalen. But in terms of the Eagles, right, they're sitting at 9-1 again. Right. Last year, all the talk was, it was the easy schedule. Well, you can't say that about them this year. And yet, there's still people who are like, I don't know, and they're not doing this, they're not doing that. Like, are we underestimating, like, and let's ignore even the playoffs and all of that. Are we, like, in terms of the regular season, like over the last 20 games, right? They won 18 of them and lost 2. Are we underestimating or underappreciating or undervaluing how good this team are? Or is it just that, they play in the NFC East and therefore they play the Giants, they play the Commanders, that they're not as deserving of the hype from your perspective?
Well, I mean, we'll lead with this. We've definitely learned that Doug Peterson did, in fact, deserve the 2012 Coach of the Year because we see what Brian Daboll is doing when he has to have a playbook bigger than give the ball to Saquon. But listen, I know that's a cheap shot, but the facts of the case are those, my friend. And from that standpoint, the Eagles' schedule is easier because they get to play that game twice. I get it. Playing against Sam Howell twice, not intimidating. It's all good. But there are other games on the schedule, like having to rematch the 49ers. That's a tough one. The Bills this week, for example. That's another tough game that's on the schedule, regardless of the up and down nature that is the Buffalo Bills, who, by the way, fire their offensive coordinator and then light up the Jets defense, which is pretty good. That's some statement. But I say all the above to say this there, Colum. When it comes to the Eagles, the reason why there's doubt, and no disrespect to your Jalen Hurts hype train, by the way. Well, I'll touch on him in a minute. But with the Eagles in particular, they themselves are similar. They're the Bills without the off the field disarray. Okay. They're a team that comes out flat or they'll come out big and hold on at the end. The inconsistency of their performance is enough to leave fans and analysts confused. Now, I'm not among them because Nick Sirianni A source tells me that Nick Sirianni believes in building the trenches inside out. That source, Nick Sirianni in Phoenix at the Super Bowl. Okay. So, I think because that foundation exists, like Patrick LaVon Mahomes II, as long as they have that trench warfare where they do, they're never out of a game. Now, another guy who's a non-quarterback who I think should get at least some MVP conversation is AJ Brown. He's not in my top 5, but I get him being there being a big deal. He's had a fantastic season so far, and certainly one of the best acquisitions that isn't Jalen Hurts, right, by the Eagles in the recent years. Now, with Jalen Hurts in particular, I know there was a lot of critics of him coming in early. I always thought he had too much criticism. Then when the hype train got to him being an MVP candidate last year, that's where I started to get to pumping the brakes a little bit. This is a good quarterback. Jalen Hurts would have still gotten my MVP vote as a losing team if Patrick LaVon Mahomes II didn't make that 29-yard run on an injured ankle. The story won him that MVP for me, not the stats, not the performance per se, right? Jalen Hurts is a good quarterback. Jalen Hurts is a Super Bowl winning potential quarterback. And listen, I feel like say what you will about the quarterback sneak, which has been unfortunately bastardized by the national media here in America, to the brotherly shove and the tush push and all this stuff. Hey, listen, Hall of Fame center Jason Kelce is a big part of that. And as I flash my credentials on my video of my offensive lineman painting, yeah, that's me in, some sort of artistic form. Listen, the artist took some liberties to make me look better than I really am. But the punchline's this: to listen to the disrespect upon Jason Kelce. Oh, the QB sneak, anybody could do it to get yards. Ban it. Name me another team that comes close to running it that well. The only good news that the NFL has about this trash about banning the quarterback sneak, Jason Kelce's pretty close to retiring, I think.
Yeah, he is getting up there, but yeah, no, massively impressive. I liked your it sounded like a Doug Stanhope impersonation when you were mocking the people who were questioning the QB sneak. Just one point that I thought was interesting, because you said almost that in some ways the Bills and the Eagles have similarities, but the Eagles don't have the off-field chaos. And
Correct.
I think is that interesting? Like I see a lot of what you're saying in terms of, I think the Bills are a really talented roster as well, but if you were to look at it maybe from the outside, you would say that the Bills, in theory, have a coach who, at least aesthetically, or in like in the way he conducts himself on the sideline, is much like calmer, not as demonstrative as Nicholas Sirianni, who is very out there in how he do. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen that clip of Jalen Hurts, the QB, having to calm down Nick Sirianni, which is wonderful. Philly is known, and I love Philly. It's a special place in my heart. I spent time there when I was 17 working on a Habitat for Humanity project, a couple of months. It was a great city, but it's known for being wild.
Sure.
They have some wild players there in Philly, and yet, as you said, like, they're so focused. And yet you look at the Bills and we see in which Sean McDermott, like, the Eagles lost their two coordinators to head coaching roles. The Bills have fired their coordinators. Sean McDermott is, for all the appearances of calmness, is pretty prickly at the podium on plenty of occasions. The Stephon Diggs stuff and everything else. In terms of where the Bills are at, for the talent on the roster, how far can they go? Do you have them making the playoffs? Do you think they can get to the championship game? Where does 2023 end for this Buffalo Bills team?
Yeah, I still have them making the playoffs, so their schedule wrapping up is pretty difficult. And listen, the defensive losses they suffer on the year, in particular, out there on your side of the pond playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, were huge. They took their toll. By the way, not for nothing, I did predict that Josh Allen on Josh Allen crime would go in favor of the Jags back in early September. Yes, I'm taking, or excuse me, early August. Yes, I'm taking a victory lap, but nonetheless, I think the defensive losses in the secondary were unbelievable, and up front, I think they have the most underrated defensive tackle core in the league. So they do have that still going for them. They're typically capable of being good at stopping the run if they can be put in a position by their offense to then further take the run and balanced offense of an opponent out of a game. You don't always get that. And listen, Colum, when they first acquired Stephon Diggs, I had told America, I'm on record as the student of the game saying that Stephon Diggs will be the offensive MVP because a then struggling Josh Allen struggled a lot less upon Stephon Diggs's induction into the offense. And then that unfortunate 15-second situation happened. Unfortunate if you're a Bills fan, of course, where Patrick Mahomes II just what just happened is what a lot of people say after that overtime game and all of that. But I'll say this too. I think you're also alluding to Jalen Hurts' leadership versus Josh Allen's. AJ Brown's personality versus Stephon Diggs. He went from being a main player shipped out of Minnesota to go to another northern cold weather city in Buffalo, whereas AJ Brown was sent from a struggling team to a better culture where he was then put in a position to just absolutely drink in what was going on and assimilate himself to it far more cleanly. The opportunity, I think, drove AJ Brown to, for lack of a better word, behave more in line, whereas Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen and that drama there. Listen, being frustrated in what's going on in Buffalo is perfectly allowed. I think their window's closed there. They're going to make the playoffs. How many playoff games they'll win, that's a separate conversation, and I reserve the right to see who that opponent is in the playoffs, assuming I'm correct in their getting there.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the culture thing is kind of fascinating in that the Eagles bring in Jalen Carter, who we know fell in the draft for off the field issues and a car crash where people were killed. And yet he's been fantastic on the field. There don't appear to be any issues. Maybe the Eagles are just really good at keeping all this stuff in house. But I think it's a very fair point, that comparison that you make, Diggs and AJ Brown, and the way in which AJ Brown, like, yeah, look, every wide receiver is a little bit of a diva. They have their quibbles, but and AJ Brown had a bit of a, he had his moments earlier. I think it was week 1 where he talked a little bit, but all it was a quick quibble, and he was back to work. There was no demonstrations on the sideline. There was no playing it up to the camera during the game. There was nobody from his family tweeting very publicly during the game. I think those comparisons are really interesting. Let's get because I'm conscious of your time, but let's talk a little bit about the team that you cover most frequently, and that is the Jaguars, who have been an interesting one because they went into this season as, I think, the consensus favorites for the South, and they have had moments during the year. I mean, week 1, Ridley and Trevor Lawrence looked good. Since then, it hasn't looked so good. Obviously, they essentially got spanked by the 49ers, and then probably had their most impressive offensive showing, even though it wasn't the best in terms of points scored. It was just below that, but probably their most complete offensive performance against the Titans at the weekend. Now, the Titans are the great team, but where and you get to see them up close, you're in the locker room, you're around the building, like, was there a fundamental change like over the course of the last week? I know when Doug was at the podium after the 49ers game, and in stark contrast to, say, Brandon Staley or Sean McDermott, he was kind of asked about the offense, and he was asked about some of the air yards and stuff like that, and he wasn't prickly about it. He heard it. He said, yeah, we're going to go away and look at some things, and my goodness, they did that, and Sunday was pretty impressive.
No, and that's a great point. I was in that press conference that you're mentioning, and listen, Doug Peterson has never really been, to use your word, he's not a prickly dude. He's a very straightforward guy. One might argue he's air quotes boring. I wouldn't say so, but he is rather direct, and he's not he's certainly not. You mentioned Staley, nothing like that's going on. I'll grant you that. But what I found fascinating about that too is in playing the Niners, the point he made is that the Niners are the team that they're looking to become. They're still super young, not just as with their player base, but as an organization. By the way, people seem to keep forgetting that Anton Harrison is a rookie at tackle who has faced a deluge of difficult linemen. They'll even realign defensive tackles to battle him specifically, right? Chris Jones of the Chiefs, by the way, happens to come back the week they come to Everbank Stadium. DeForest Buckner, the Colts tackle, they split him outside to battle the rookie. And I'm not here to say he's done a great job, but he did hold his own and do enough to win certain football games, right? TJ Watt in Pittsburgh. Anton Harrison had to do that battle. Trial by fire was the description by Doug Peterson for what that young man had to deal with. And that's something I wanted to bring up really quick because you mentioned Trevor Lawrence in the offense. I think the issues begin to stem from the interior line. Listen, they've kicked Walker Little inside. Cam Robinson's back from suspension at this point. They've looked better than they have, but against a team that's so wild up front like the 49ers, it just didn't matter. By the way, there's certain little circumstantial things that happened to go wrong in that game. The Jags have struggled all year in the red zone. That's their biggest problem on offense. You mentioned Calvin Ridley. He has a number of dropped touchdowns on the year. It's not Kansas City Chiefs big, but let's put it this way. It's ironic we're talking about games lost by the Chiefs with drops at the end because it was a drop at the beginning of the Jags-Chiefs game in Everbank that ended up making the difference there. Calvin Ridley had a short touchdown that he dropped, for example. But I think what we're seeing is that chemistry with Trevor Lawrence and himself starting to develop, right? Zay Jones back in the lineup apparently means a ton to this team. As a third receiver, even though the big, air quotes, big names are Calvin Ridley, are Christian Kirk, are Evan Ingram, what's going on when Zay Jones is in the lineup? It seems to elevate Calvin Ridley's numbers as well. Jones didn't necessarily have a big game this past week, but Calvin Ridley has had his biggest game in weeks, to your point. I think the turnovers in key times in the red zone have killed this team throughout the year. Red zone performance in general has been a problem. And then this week, Trevor Lawrence took matters into his own hands, or shall I say his own feet, by running in 2 touchdowns to the first Jacksonville Jaguar quarterback to have 2 touchdowns and 2 passing touchdowns. 2 touchdowns running and passing. And that's after getting called out by his former teammate in Arden Key of the Tennessee Titans, signing up to this whole concept that Trevor Lawrence is allegedly a one-read quarterback. Well, he saw a read he didn't like, and then he ran it in a couple times on Yard, and I'll leave it that way. Although I will admit, Trevor's response was funny when asked about that post-game. He goes, I didn't know Arden said that. That kind of hurts. And my former teammate said that, but he said it best. If there's a narrative, change the narrative. And I believe that's what Trevor Lawrence and this entire offense is trying to do. That being said, get some offensive help in the middle in this next draft, and this team will be a real threat.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have seen Trevor show he can win in lots of different ways. I think the one thing that he might need to work on that maybe some of Peyton Manning always had a great quick comeback. I don't know if you remember when Peyton was asked about towards the end of his career, and he seemed to be throwing a lot of wobbly passes, and he said, "Yeah, I throw a lot of wobbly touchdowns," which was a nice way of ending that line of questioning. So that's the only thing I think Trevor needs to get the comebacks, and that'll end those questions.
Listen, the best quote you're going to get out of Trevor Lawrence is celebrating at the Waffle House. He's just not that dude. Trevor Lawrence is not hosting Saturday Night Live, Colum. But hey, listen.
Yeah.
If we're going to bring up the Jags, I would be remiss, and I've written about this twice this season already on the Jaguar Report at SI. Bing! This defense is carrying this team in a lot of ways. For all the offensive struggles, they're still getting the W's from a team with Josh Allen up front, Trayvon Walker on the other side, and then Andre Sisco as a safety who's popped out to be suddenly one of the NFL's best. Foye Oluokun, who is the defensive captain. At times this year, they've led the NFL in turnovers. Last week they didn't, or excuse me, 2 weeks ago they didn't get any against the 49ers because, goodness gracious, Trent Williams was back in the lineup. There just wasn't a lot they could do defensively. But they went back to their ways, causing 2 fumbles and dropping a number of Will Levis interceptions. So if they can get that sort of stuff going against CJ Stroud, that'll certainly help. And that being said, we just mentioned Stroud had 3 interceptions and still won the game. But I'm going to be bold enough to say that the Jags are better than the Cardinals.
Well done on winning the taller than Danny DeVito contest there. Kyle,
about talking about taller than DeVito, now you're talking about quarterback play in New York there, but I digress.
And so, yeah, who may be better than Daniel Jones, which is another, I think, taller than Danny DeVito contest. But for people, Kyle, for people on this side of the Atlantic who want to check out your stuff, where can they do that?
Hey, yeah, no, an honor, joy, and privilege to be in tonight, Colum. But yes, I'm Kyle Nash, a student of the game. You can find me on Twitter at the SOTG. Find me on Instagram as the same, the SOTG, on Threads as well. Find me on Facebook as the student of the game. Check out my writing with, as I mentioned earlier, the Jaguar Report, Fan Nation, and SI. My work with the 3-point conversion as well. I write for them. And also check out my locker room interviews with the Jags on their YouTube channel, the 3-point conversion. Also, I cover the UCF Knights for college football and basketball, men's and women's, with the Black and Gold Banneret, and also with the Night Shift podcast. By the way, we talked about Jags coverage before, Colum. I have a podcast called The Duval Dive that I do on Fridays, 11:15 Eastern. So let me do the math. It's 5 hours. I think it's like 3 p.m. your time. So, hey, listen. Just before, got a little time in that lull at work, or hey, just listen to the podcast. By the way, Student of the Game podcast is out there on all your pod things there too. Also, the Student of the Game podcast. I do a lot of stuff, Colum. I keep busy. What can I say? Also covering the Orlando Magic for the NBA with A7BN Sports. An honor, joy, and privilege, my friend.
A man of myriad talents, and given that the Jags have a decent and growing fan base over here, would absolutely advocate you checking out Kyle's stuff. Kyle will hopefully have you back on again in the not too distant future, but for now, thanks for taking the time to chat to me today.
I love the sound of it, Colum. Always great to talk to you. Until next time, friends. Class dismissed.